Imagine stepping into a place that promises warmth, comfort, and inclusion, only to be met with cold stares and rejection. Now, picture this. A customer rolls into a busy fast food restaurant in their wheelchair, hoping for a quick meal and a moment of normalcy. Instead, they're greeted with hostility. The manager makes no effort to hide their disdain and dismisses them with a cruel remark. "We don't have room for people like you here." But what if that very customer, the one they humiliated and cast aside, was the CEO of the entire chain? This is the story of Malcolm Reed, the brilliant mind behind Burger Haven, a fast food empire built on the belief that everyone deserves a seat at the table. From bustling cities to quiet suburbs, his restaurants serve millions each day, spreading joy with every burger and fries combo. But Malcolm's world is shaken when he discovers a troubling reality. In one of his own restaurants, the values he holds dear are being trampled. What happens when the founder of a nationwide phenomenon goes undercover to uncover the truth? What would you do if your life's work was being tarnished by prejudice and cruelty? This isn't just a story about food, it's a story about power, dignity, and the courage to confront injustice head-on. It's about what one man did when his vision for equality and respect was tested in the most personal way. Stay with us as we dive into a tale of betrayal, revelation, and a resolution that transformed not just a single restaurant, but an entire company. Because by the end, you'll see how one moment of courage can ignite a movement of change. And if stories of justice, transformation, and inspiration move you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales that will leave you inspired. Malcolm Reed wasn't born into wealth, privilege, or power. In fact, the odds were stacked against him from the very beginning. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Detroit, he learned early on what it meant to struggle. His father worked long hours as a mechanic, and his mother balanced 2 jobs while raising Malcolm and his younger brother Caleb. For Malcolm, family was everything, and Caleb, who was born with a physical disability, became his greatest inspiration. From a young age, Malcolm saw how Caleb was treated differently. Teachers, neighbors, and even strangers often looked at him with pity or avoided him altogether. It made Malcolm furious, but it also fueled his determination. He promised himself that one day he would build something, a business, a brand, or even just a safe space, where everyone, including people like Caleb, would feel like they truly belonged. That dream took root when Malcolm got his first job at a small burger joint on the corner of his neighborhood. It wasn't glamorous work, flipping patties, mopping floors, and taking orders from grumpy customers, but Malcolm saw potential in every detail. He realized that a burger wasn't just food, it was a moment of joy, a small escape from the challenges of life. He started dreaming of what a fast food restaurant could be, not just a place to eat quickly, but a place that welcomed everyone. Years later, after graduating from college and saving every penny he could, Malcolm opened the first Burger Haven in downtown Detroit. It was a modest start, just a tiny shop with 5 employees and a lot of hope. But what set it apart was Malcolm's philosophy: fast food for everyone. From the beginning, he made it clear that every customer, no matter who they were, would be treated with respect and kindness. His approach worked. Word spread about the little burger shop that made people feel special. Over time, Burger Haven grew from one small location to a national chain with hundreds of stores across the United States. It wasn't just about the burgers, fries, or shakes. It was about the experience. Malcolm worked hard to create a brand that felt personal, inclusive, and welcoming. But as the company expanded, Malcolm faced challenges he never anticipated. Success brought new faces into his business, some who didn't share his vision. He trusted his managers to carry out the values he had built the company on. Yet as Malcolm's responsibilities grew, he found himself more distanced from the day-to-day operations. For years, Caleb remained Malcolm's grounding force. Despite his disability, Caleb became an advocate for inclusion and accessibility, reminding Malcolm of the importance of the mission they shared. But Caleb's untimely passing a few years ago left a void in Malcolm's life. Without his brother's voice, Malcolm sometimes wondered if the heart of his company was still beating as strongly as it once had. That question hit him squarely in the face when he received the first complaint about the Texas branch of Burger Haven. A customer had written directly to Malcolm, describing a humiliating experience at the hands of the branch's manager, Joshua Miller. The letter read, "I came to Burger Haven because I've always loved what your brand stands for. I've heard your speeches, seen your commercials, and believed that this was a place for everyone. But today I left feeling invisible. I use a wheelchair, and when I asked for assistance, the manager told me there wasn't space for me and suggested I leave. I've never felt so small in my life. Is this what Burger Haven has become?" Malcolm read the letter twice, each word cutting deeper than the last. He could feel the weight of the betrayal, not just to the customer, but to Caleb's memory and everything Burger Haven was supposed to represent. Joshua Miller wasn't just any manager. He ran one of the busiest and most profitable branches in the entire chain. His numbers were impeccable, and on paper, he seemed like an exemplary employee. But the letter revealed something Malcolm couldn't ignore. Success on paper meant nothing if the values behind it were rotten. Malcolm knew he couldn't just send an email or schedule a phone call. This was personal. He needed to see what was happening with his own eyes. For years, he had stayed behind the scenes, trusting his team to uphold the principles of the brand. But now, it was time for him to step back into the spotlight. The decision was clear. Malcolm would go to the Texas branch, not as the CEO of Burger Haven, but as an ordinary customer. He wanted to experience firsthand what his customers were going through. If there were cracks in the foundation of his company, he was going to find them. That night, as Malcolm prepared for the trip, he thought of Caleb. He remembered the countless times his brother had been excluded, dismissed, or overlooked simply because he was different. This wasn't just about one branch or one manager. This was about everything Malcolm and Caleb had ever stood for. As he packed his bag, Malcolm whispered to himself, "This is for you, Caleb, and for every person who's ever been told they don't belong." With that, he grabbed his coat, locked his office, and headed into the night, ready to confront the truth and bring justice to the table. Malcolm Reed had always believed in trust. He trusted his managers, his team, and the values that had built Burger Haven into a household name. But trust is fragile, and the complaint he'd received about the Texas branch was a glaring red flag. It wasn't the first complaint either. Over the past few months, whispers about the branch had begun to surface. Customers had mentioned feeling unwelcome, and a handful of employees had quietly resigned, citing an unfriendly work environment. None of the complaints explicitly mentioned discrimination, but Malcolm knew how prejudice often disguised itself, subtle, insidious, and wrapped in excuses. The branch manager, Joshua Miller, was a name Malcolm recognized. On paper, Joshua was a star. His branch had consistently high sales, glowing customer reviews in official surveys, and impeccable financial records. Malcolm had even met Joshua briefly at a corporate event years ago. A confident man in his early 30s, dressed sharply, shaking hands like he owned the room. But what Malcolm didn't see back then was the arrogance lurking beneath that confidence. Joshua was the kind of manager who thrived on power, and his success had given him free rein to run the Texas branch his way. His way, as Malcolm was now learning, came at the cost of Burger Haven's values. As Malcolm delved deeper into the situation, he uncovered troubling patterns. A former employee from the Texas branch had left a cryptic exit survey stating, "This place doesn't feel like Burger Haven anymore. It feels like it belongs to one person, and he decides who's welcome and who isn't." Another employee, who reached out anonymously, described how Joshua prioritized wealthy-looking customers or families who appeared put together. Meanwhile, individuals with disabilities, working-class attire, or even larger families were often ignored or treated dismissively. Malcolm sat in his office, reading through the reports, his frustration growing with each word. He had built Burger Haven to be a beacon of inclusivity, a place where everyone could walk in and feel valued, regardless of who they were. Yet here was a man tarnishing that vision in one of their most prominent branches. The letter from the wheelchair user replayed in Malcolm's mind. He couldn't shake the words. "I thought this was a place for everyone." Those words haunted him, and he knew they were a direct challenge to everything he stood for. To understand the scope of the issue, Malcolm reached out to a few other managers in the area. Some were hesitant to speak, fearing retaliation, but one brave assistant manager from a neighboring branch shared her perspective. "Joshua's branch is all about appearances," she said. "He makes great numbers, but at what cost? He's been known to turn away people he thinks don't fit the brand. We've heard stories, but no one's had the courage to report it formally. He's untouchable. At least, that's what he thinks." Malcolm's jaw tightened as he listened. He knew he couldn't wait any longer. Trust had to be earned. And right now, the Texas branch and Joshua had lost his. The next day, Malcolm quietly instructed his assistant to arrange his trip to Texas, but he didn't want it announced. If Joshua caught wind of the CEO's visit, everything would be staged to perfection. Malcolm needed the truth, not a show. To prepare, Malcolm studied the branch's layout, its staffing schedules, and even its busiest hours. He wanted to immerse himself fully in the customer experience, just as he had in the early days of Burger Haven. Back then, he would personally visit each new location, sometimes undercover, to see how his vision was coming to life. This time, however, he felt different. This wasn't about checking on customer service or menu execution. This was about confronting something far more personal, prejudice within his own walls. Malcolm couldn't help but think of Caleb as he planned his visit. His brother had always been his compass, guiding him toward empathy and inclusion. Caleb would have been heartbroken to hear what had happened at the Texas branch. The night before his flight, Malcolm sat at his desk, staring at an old photo of himself and Caleb. They were teenagers in the picture, sitting on the hood of their father's car, grinning ear to ear. Caleb had a way of making everyone around him feel seen and valued, no matter what colored skin they came from. "I'll fix this, Caleb," Malcolm said softly. "For you, for that customer, and for every person who's ever been made to feel small." The morning of his visit, Malcolm dressed in his undercover attire, a simple shirt, jeans, and sneakers. He left behind his usual polished suit and expensive watch. Instead of arriving in a sleek company car, he rented a modest vehicle to blend in. The plan was simple. He would walk into the Texas branch as a regular customer, observe the staff, and experience the environment firsthand. He wasn't just looking for Joshua's behavior. He wanted to understand the culture that had allowed this to happen. As Malcolm stepped onto the plane, he couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and determination. This wasn't just about addressing one manager or fixing one branch. It was about ensuring that Burger Haven lived up to its promise, a promise that Caleb and so many others had believed in. The stakes were high, but Malcolm was ready. The truth awaited him in Texas, and he was determined to face it, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. Malcolm Reed approached the Texas branch of Burger Haven with a heavy heart, but a clear mission. From the moment he stepped inside, he was determined to observe, to listen, and to uncover the truth about what was happening in one of his most profitable locations. The restaurant was busy as expected, with a steady stream of customers lining up for their meals. On the surface, It looked like any other successful branch in his fast food empire. Families were chatting at tables, workers on lunch breaks were hunched over burgers, and the staff was bustling behind the counter. But Malcolm's trained eye picked up on something that the numbers on paper could never show: an undercurrent of tension, unease, and subtle exclusion. At first it was small things. A mother with 2 young children stood in line, her toddler fidgeting restlessly. She asked the cashier if she could have some extra napkins, only to be met with an irritated glare and a curt response. Across the room, 2 men in worn construction uniforms were seated at a corner table, but their trays had been dropped off without a word or even a glance from the staff. Malcolm's suspicions deepened when he noticed the arrival of a man in a wheelchair. The man wheeled himself into the restaurant and glanced around for an accessible seat. His movements were deliberate, his expression calm, but the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted immediately. The cashier at the counter hesitated when the man approached, her eyes darting nervously to the back of the restaurant. Moments later, Joshua Miller, the branch manager, appeared from his office. His suit was crisp, his expression sharp, and his demeanor radiated authority, but not the kind that put others at ease. Malcolm watched as Joshua approached the man in the wheelchair. The manager's expression was neutral, but his words carried a thinly veiled edge. Excuse me, Joshua said, his voice cold and formal. Can I help you with something? Yes, the man replied, his tone polite but firm. I just need a little help carrying my tray to the table. Joshua's response was immediate and devastating. I'm sorry, but we're very busy right now and we can't accommodate every special request. You're welcome to sit, but we can't offer table service here. The man blinked, clearly taken aback. It's not table service. I just need a hand, he said, his voice faltering slightly. Joshua shook his head, his tone growing firmer. If you're unable to manage on your own, there are other places that might be better suited for you. The silence that followed was deafening. Malcolm could see the humiliation wash over the man's face as he turned his wheelchair toward the door, quietly leaving the restaurant. No one intervened. No one said a word. Joshua, satisfied, straightened his tie and returned to the back office as if nothing had happened. Malcolm's chest tightened with anger and sadness. He had built Burger Haven to be a place where everyone felt welcome, a place where no one, regardless of their circumstances, would ever be made to feel small. Yet here, in one of his flagship locations, those values were being trampled. Over the next hour, Malcolm continued to observe the restaurant. Customers who fit Joshua's unspoken standards, dressed well, driving luxury cars or appearing affluent, were greeted warmly, served quickly, and often offered extra courtesies. But anyone who didn't match that image, a mother with a crying baby, a young man in worn clothes, or an elderly couple who moved slowly, was met with impatience or indifference. Eventually, Malcolm decided to test the waters himself. He placed a simple order, a burger and fries, and when the tray was ready, he asked the cashier if someone could help him carry it to his table. The cashier froze, her eyes flickering nervously toward the back office. Within seconds, Joshua appeared again, his expression sharp and unwelcoming. "Is there a problem?" Joshua asked. His tone clipped. "No problem," Malcolm said evenly. "I just need a little help getting my tray to the table." Joshua folded his arms, his gaze narrowing. "Sir, this is a fast food restaurant. We don't provide personal assistance. If you need that kind of service, you're welcome to visit a different establishment." Malcolm held his ground, keeping his expression neutral even as anger bubbled beneath the surface. "Interesting," he said quietly. "I've visited other Burger Haven branches, and they've been more than happy to help." Joshua smirked, his tone turning dismissive. "Well, maybe they don't run as tight of a ship as we do here. We focus on efficiency, not extras." The encounter was enough to confirm everything Malcolm had suspected and feared. Joshua wasn't just a bad manager. He was actively creating a culture of exclusion, using his position to reinforce his own prejudices. As Malcolm left the restaurant, he glanced back at the neon Burger Haven sign glowing brightly above the door. To the outside world, this was just another successful branch of a beloved fast food chain. But to Malcolm, it represented a failure, a betrayal of the principles he and his late brother Caleb had fought so hard to uphold. In that moment, Malcolm made a silent vow. Tomorrow, he would return, not as a quiet observer, but as the CEO of Burger Haven, ready to confront the problem head-on. Malcolm Reed returned to his hotel that evening, emotionally drained but resolute. What he had witnessed at the Texas branch of Burger Haven was more than just bad management. It was a betrayal of everything his company stood for. The memory of the man in the wheelchair being turned away lingered in his mind, alongside the image of Joshua Miller's smug expression. For years, Malcolm had led his company with the belief that trust and delegation were essential for growth. But now, he realized trust without accountability was dangerous. If one branch could stray so far from the values of Burger Haven, how many others might be slipping through the cracks? It was time to take action. The next morning, Malcolm suited up, not in his usual casual attire, but in the crisp, tailored suit that symbolized his position as CEO. The decision to confront Joshua directly wasn't just about justice. It was about setting a precedent. No one, no matter how successful their branch appeared on paper, would be allowed to compromise the integrity of his brand. Before leaving for the restaurant, Malcolm called his assistant Lauren back at the corporate office. "I'm heading to the Texas branch today," he told her. "Inform the regional manager to meet me there in an hour. I want this to be addressed immediately." Lauren didn't need further explanation. She had worked with Malcolm long enough to know that when he took matters into his own hands, it meant something serious was at stake. When Malcolm arrived at the restaurant later that morning, the atmosphere inside was already tense. News of his impending visit had spread quickly, and Joshua was scrambling to make the branch look as polished as possible. Staff were frantically cleaning counters, adjusting displays, and offering forced smiles to customers. As Malcolm stepped through the doors, the energy in the room shifted. Staff members froze, recognizing him instantly. Conversations quieted, and all eyes turned toward him. Joshua appeared moments later, his confident demeanor intact, but his expression betraying a flicker of uncertainty. "Mr. Reed," Joshua greeted with a broad smile, extending his hand. "What an honor to have you here. If I'd known you were coming, I would have prepared a proper welcome." Malcolm shook his hand firmly, his expression unreadable. "Good to see you, Joshua," he said evenly. "I wanted to visit one of our busiest branches to see how things are running here." Joshua's chest puffed up with pride. "You've come to the right place. This branch has been performing exceptionally well, and we've maintained top-tier customer satisfaction." Malcolm nodded slowly, scanning the room. "That's interesting," he said. "I visited here yesterday, unannounced." Joshua's confident smile faltered, his brow furrowing. "Oh, really? I wish I'd known. I hope that you don't have met your expectations, guarantee? Because I know some people, like yourself..." Malcolm's gaze hardened. "Not exactly. I witnessed a customer in a wheelchair being turned away without assistance. I also saw a pattern of selective service that runs counter to our core values. Care to explain?" The room fell silent. Staff members exchanged uneasy glances, their nervous energy palpable. Joshua's face turned pale as he scrambled for a response. "Well, sir," Joshua began, his voice unsteady, "we have policies in place to ensure efficiency. Sometimes, during busy hours, it's difficult to accommodate every request." Malcolm cut him off. "That's not what I saw. What I saw was a customer being humiliated for needing a little extra help. And what I saw was a manager more concerned with appearances than treating people with dignity." Joshua stammered, I didn't mean any harm, sir. It was a misunderstanding. I can assure you it won't happen again. Malcolm stepped closer, his voice low but firm. You're right. It won't happen again, because I'm here to make sure it doesn't. At that moment, the regional manager, Rebecca Hill, entered the restaurant. Rebecca was a no-nonsense leader who had been with Burger Haven since its early days. She immediately sensed the gravity of the situation and positioned herself beside Malcolm. Rebecca, Malcolm said, addressing her directly. I've seen enough here to know that this branch is failing to uphold our values. Effective immediately, I want a full review of its operations, starting with the management. Joshua's face turned crimson. Sir, please, give me another chance. I've done everything to ensure this branch's success. Our numbers speak for themselves. Numbers don't tell the whole story, Joshua, Malcolm replied. What matters is how we treat people, every person who walks through those doors. And right now, you've shown me that this branch isn't living up to that standard. Joshua opened his mouth to protest, but Malcolm raised a hand to silence him. You're going to stay here for the next month, Malcolm continued, his tone sharp, but not as the branch manager. Rebecca will oversee operations, and you'll be on the front lines, interacting with customers. You're going to learn what it means to serve with respect. The room buzzed with quiet murmurs as staff members exchanged stunned looks. Pope, sir, Joshua started, his voice breaking. No buts, Malcolm interrupted. You've built a culture of exclusion here, and it ends now. This isn't just about one mistake. It's about the message we send to every person who chooses Burger Haven. And that message must always be one of inclusion and respect. As Malcolm left the restaurant, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. The confrontation had been uncomfortable, but necessary. This was about more than one branch or one manager. It was about holding himself, his team, and his company accountable to the promise they had made to their customers. Later that day, Malcolm sat in his hotel room and drafted an internal memo to all Burger Haven employees. The message was clear. Respect isn't optional. It's the foundation of who we are. The day of reckoning arrived swiftly. Malcolm Reed, now fully prepared, stepped into the Texas branch of Burger Haven with a commanding presence. He wasn't just a quiet observer this time. He was here to make a statement. His sharp suit and steady gaze left no doubt about his authority. The entire staff had been informed of his visit, and the tension in the air was palpable. Employees whispered nervously among themselves, while customers, unaware of the storm brewing, continued enjoying their meals. At the center of the restaurant, Joshua Miller stood, barking orders at his staff with his usual bravado, oblivious to the incoming confrontation. Malcolm approached the counter calmly, his eyes scanning the room as he made his way forward. Rebecca Hill, the regional manager, was already there, standing to the side with a clipboard, observing the operations with her characteristic no-nonsense demeanor. She gave Malcolm a brief nod, silently acknowledging her readiness to support him. Joshua finally noticed Malcolm and straightened his tie, a forced smile spreading across his face. Mr. Reed, he greeted loudly, extending his hand. Welcome back. It's such an honor to have you here. Malcolm shook his hand briefly, his expression unreadable. Good to see you again, Joshua. I thought today would be a good time to review how things are running here. Joshua's confident demeanor faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. Absolutely. We've been working hard to ensure everything is operating at the highest standard. I'm sure you'll be pleased with what you see. Malcolm's gaze sharpened. I'd like to begin by addressing what I saw during my last visit. The restaurant fell silent. Even the background hum of conversations from customers seemed to fade. Employees paused mid-task, their eyes flickering toward the confrontation. Joshua's smile froze, and he hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying, Of course, I hope everything met your expectations. Not exactly, Malcolm said, his voice calm but resolute. I saw a customer in a wheelchair being turned away. I saw people treated with indifference and disrespect. I saw selective service that goes against every value this company stands for. Joshua's face turned pale. He glanced around, clearly aware of the growing attention from staff and customers. "Sir, I can assure you that must have been a misunderstanding. We always strive to—" Malcolm raised a hand, cutting him off. "Joshua, stop. What I saw wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern, a culture that you've allowed to fester under your leadership." Joshua opened his mouth to protest, but Malcolm continued, his voice growing firmer. "This isn't about sales numbers or efficiency metrics. This is about respect, something you've clearly forgotten. This branch might be one of the most profitable in the chain, but it's also one of the most broken." The room was now completely silent. Even customers were beginning to take notice of the confrontation, whispering to one another as they watched the scene unfold. Rebecca stepped forward, her voice clear and authoritative. "Mr. Miller, we've received numerous complaints about this branch. Reports of customers being mistreated, employees feeling unsupported, and values being ignored. This is unacceptable and it ends today." Joshua looked between Rebecca and Malcolm, his expression shifting from denial to panic. "Please, sir," he said, turning to Malcolm, "give me another chance. I've done everything to make this branch successful. I'll fix whatever you think is wrong." Malcolm took a step closer, his voice low but powerful. "This isn't just about fixing numbers or processes, Joshua. This is about rebuilding trust with your customers, your team, and this company. Starting today, you're stepping down as manager of this branch." Gasps rippled through the room. Joshua's face turned red and he stammered, "Wait, you can't—" Malcolm raised his hand again, silencing him. "You'll stay here for the next month, but not as a manager. You'll be on the front lines, working directly with customers, especially those you've failed. You'll greet every single person who walks through that door, and you'll treat them with the respect they deserve." Joshua's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Rebecca added, her tone sharp, "During this time, you'll also undergo intensive training on customer service and inclusion. If you're unwilling or unable to comply, you're welcome to step down entirely." Malcolm turned to address the entire staff. "Let me be clear, this isn't just about one person. It's about the values that define Burger Haven. We promise every customer a welcoming and inclusive experience, and that promise starts with each of you. If anyone feels they cannot uphold that standard, this is your opportunity to speak up." The staff exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. Joshua finally found his voice, though it was barely audible. "I understand," he muttered. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Malcolm nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Good. This isn't about punishment, it's about growth. But let me be clear, growth only happens if you're willing to change." The showdown concluded with Rebecca taking over the immediate leadership of the branch. Malcolm stayed for another hour, speaking individually with employees and even customers, ensuring they felt heard and valued. As he left the restaurant, the weight of the confrontation lifted slightly. It wasn't an easy battle, but it was a necessary one. Malcolm knew this was just the beginning of a larger journey to repair the damage and reinforce the values Burger Haven was built on. That evening, Malcolm drafted an email to his executive team, outlining plans for a company-wide initiative on inclusivity and customer service. His final line read, "Today wasn't about one branch, it was about reminding us who we are. Respect isn't optional, it's the foundation of everything we do." The day after Malcolm Reed's confrontation at the Texas branch, the atmosphere was electric. The staff, still reeling from the CEO's visit, spoke in hushed tones, their glances darting nervously between one another. For some, it was a wake-up call. For others, it was a reckoning. But one thing was clear. Everything had changed. At the center of it all was Joshua Miller, no longer the commanding presence he once was. Instead of standing in his office, delegating tasks and managing from a distance, he now worked on the front lines. Dressed in the standard Burger Haven uniform instead of his usual tailored suit, Joshua's demeanor was subdued. His first task of the day was to greet customers, a simple enough job for most, but for Joshua, it was a humbling experience. As each person walked through the door, he was required to meet them with a smile and offer genuine assistance, no matter who they were or what they needed. Malcolm's instructions had been clear. Everyone was to be treated with respect, from the wealthiest patron to the most modest customer. The first test came when a family of 5 entered the restaurant. A mother with 3 young children and an elderly grandmother in tow. Joshua instinctively hesitated, his old habits kicking in. He glanced around, hoping someone else might step in. But when Rebecca Hill, the interim manager, shot him a pointed look, he stepped forward. "Good morning," he said, his voice stiff but polite. "How can I help you today?" The mother hesitated, clearly surprised by the sudden attention. "We'd just like to order breakfast," she said, glancing down at her children, who were already tugging at her sleeve. Joshua forced a smile. "Of course. Let me know if there's anything else you need." As he watched the family settle into their seats, something clicked. These were the same kinds of customers he'd dismissed in the past, the ones he'd labeled as difficult or not worth the effort. Now, seeing them up close, he realized they were just like anyone else, deserving of kindness, patience, and respect. Later that afternoon, a familiar face appeared, a man in a wheelchair, the same customer Joshua had dismissed days earlier. The man hesitated at the entrance, clearly unsure whether to step inside. Joshua felt his stomach drop. He glanced toward Rebecca, who nodded subtly, her arms crossed as if to say, "This is your moment to fix it." Taking a deep breath, Joshua approached the man, his voice softer than it had been in years. "Welcome back," he said. "I want to apologize for how you were treated last time. It was wrong, and it's not what Burger Haven stands for. If you'll allow me, I'd like to personally take your order and assist you today." The man blinked, clearly caught off guard. "I wasn't expecting that," he said cautiously, "but thank you." Joshua followed through, not just taking the man's order but also helping him find a table and ensuring he had everything he needed. It was a small gesture, but one that felt monumental for both of them. While Joshua wrestled with his new reality, the rest of the staff experienced a shift of their own. For months, they had worked under an unspoken rule: follow Joshua's lead, even when it didn't align with the company's values. Now, with Rebecca at the helm and Malcolm's visit fresh in their minds, many began to reflect on their own actions. "I didn't realize how much I'd normalized it," one cashier admitted to her coworker during a break. Ignoring people, judging them based on how they looked, it just felt like part of the job. But now, I see how wrong that was. Another employee chimed in, "I'm actually glad Mr. Reed came. It feels like we're finally getting back to what Burger Haven is supposed to be." News of Malcolm's visit spread quickly, with some customers sharing their experiences on social media. A post from the wheelchair user, accompanied by a picture of his meal, went viral. "And last week I was humiliated at this restaurant. Today, the manager personally apologized and made sure I had everything I needed. It's not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction. Kudos to Burger Haven for taking action." Other customers began chiming in with their own stories, both good and bad, creating a wave of accountability that rippled through the company. By the end of the first week, Joshua found himself in an unfamiliar place. Not physically, but emotionally. He had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, priding himself on efficiency and results. Yet here he was, relearning the basics of customer service and realizing how far he had strayed from the company's mission. One evening, as he wiped down tables after closing, He caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window. For the first time in years, he saw not a manager, but a man humbled by his own mistakes. He thought back to Malcolm's words during their confrontation. Growth only happens if you're willing to change. Joshua wasn't the only one transforming. Across the restaurant, other employees began embracing the renewed focus on inclusion and respect. Rebecca held daily meetings to reinforce the company's values, encouraging staff to share their thoughts and experiences. For some, the changes were challenging. Old habits died hard, and not everyone was on board immediately. But as the days turned into weeks, the culture of the restaurant began to shift. Customers noticed, employees felt it, and even Joshua, grudgingly at first, admitted that Malcolm's intervention had been necessary. By the end of the month, the Texas branch looked and felt like a different place. Customers of all backgrounds were greeted warmly, served promptly, and treated with the respect they deserved. Joshua, while still learning, began to embrace his role on the front lines, finding unexpected fulfillment in the small acts of kindness he had once dismissed as unimportant. As Malcolm received updates from Rebecca and the staff, he felt a quiet sense of pride. This wasn't just about fixing one branch. It was about proving that change, though difficult, was always possible. As the month came to an end, the Texas branch of Burger Haven had undergone a transformation. The once tense atmosphere was replaced with a sense of camaraderie and renewed purpose. Customers who had previously felt unwelcome now returned, surprised by the warm greetings and genuine service. Joshua Miller, humbled and reflective, had completed his time on the front lines. He had spent weeks greeting customers, listening to their stories, and learning what it truly meant to serve with respect. The experience had changed him, not just as a manager, but as a person. On his final day in his temporary role, Joshua approached Rebecca Hill. "I didn't realize how much I had lost sight of what Burger Haven stands for," he admitted. "This has been the most difficult month of my career, but also the most important. Thank you for holding me accountable." Rebecca gave him a nod of approval. "Growth isn't easy, but you've taken the first step. Remember, it's not about perfection, it's about progress. Keep going." Back at the corporate office, Malcolm Reed sat in his corner office, reviewing the reports from Rebecca and the Texas branch. He couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and relief. The confrontation had been necessary, but it was only the beginning. The issues at the Texas branch were a symptom of a larger challenge, ensuring that every Burger Haven location upheld the company's values, no matter how far they were from the corporate headquarters. Malcolm thought of Caleb, his late brother, and the promise they had made to each other all those years ago. We'll create a place where everyone belongs. Caleb had always believed in him, and even though he was no longer here, Malcolm felt his presence in every step of this journey. He smiled to himself as he typed a company-wide email to all employees. This month, we were reminded of an important truth. Respect isn't just something we offer, it's something we live by. It's what makes us more than a business. It's what makes us a community. Thank you to everyone who has embraced this mission. Together, we're not just serving food, we're serving humanity. To ensure this transformation extended beyond the Texas branch, Malcolm announced a company-wide initiative, Haven for All. The program focused on inclusivity training, better accessibility in all locations, and regular audits to ensure every customer was treated with dignity. Each branch would now have dedicated spaces designed for individuals with disabilities, wider aisles, accessible seating, and priority assistance for those in need. Malcolm also created a task force to oversee the initiative, led by none other than Rebecca Hill. The changes didn't go unnoticed. Customers began sharing their experiences on social media, praising Burger Haven for taking action. A mother posted about how her child, who used a wheelchair, was greeted with kindness at their local branch for the first time. Another customer shared how staff had gone out of their way to make their elderly father feel comfortable. These stories began to rebuild the trust that had been shaken, proving that Burger Haven was living up to its promise: fast food for everyone. Malcolm returned to the Texas branch a month after his initial visit. This time, the atmosphere was completely different. Staff greeted him with genuine smiles, the customers seemed at ease, and Joshua, still learning, was standing by the counter, helping a young man carry his tray to a table. Malcolm nodded to himself, satisfied. The branch had come a long way, and while there was still work to be done, the foundation for real change had been set. Before leaving, Malcolm gathered the staff for a brief meeting. "What you've done here is more than just improve a branch," he said. "You've shown that change is possible when we come together with humility and determination. Remember, every person who walks through those doors deserves to feel valued. Never lose sight of that." Malcolm's story isn't just about one restaurant or one company. It's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to stand up for what's right. Respect, inclusion, and kindness aren't just values for a business. They're values for life. And now it's your turn. What do you think about this story? Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about how we can all make the spaces around us more inclusive and welcoming. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we can create a ripple effect of change. Because, as Malcolm Reed Atrida showed us, even the smallest act of courage can transform a community. And that's a legacy worth sharing.